Hey guys, this is John, and Celebrity Sighting. I'm playing George Clooney in the 15-minute pool on ICC. We have to play e4 against Mr. Clooney. Got to give it our all. Got to be on your best behavior when a celebrity's in the building. Okay, so we have a Pirc defense, or Pirc as a lot of people call it, but I believe it's correctly pronounced Pirc. Let's check Mr. Clooney's stats. Let's see. Oh, I actually know this guy. That's funny. Yeah, this is someone from my home state of Minnesota. So his stats are 13 wins, 9 losses, peak rating of 18-17. Okay, so I'll play bishop e2. This is a pretty conservative system against this line, but I think it's nice for white. It aspires to a small advantage. If I were trying to refute this opening, I would have played f4 and gone for the Austrian attack prior to putting my knight on f3. So we'll see how he handles it. This is a favorite of Karpov. That's where I first learned it, like in going through his games. He would play this system quite frequently against the Pircs. By the way, I'm starting to think that if white starts with d4 on move 1 and black plays d6, I'm starting to think that e4 is just the best move, transposing into a Pirc defense and not really messing around too much. So he castles, I castle. Usually they play knight c6 in this position, from what I recall, or c6. Pawn c6 is also possible. If c6 is played, I'll play a4, just to stop expansion with b5. Yeah, I know George Clooney is a married man these days, but I didn't expect to find him hanging around on the ICC playing 15-minute. It's a good hobby, though. Glad he's taking it up. So bishop g4. I'll just play bishop e3 against that. This is a good square for the bishop. It can't be harassed by knight g4 anymore. Very likely I'm going to win the bishop pair because he's probably going to play bishop takes f3 at some point soon. We'll see what he commits to on the queen side. If knight c6, okay. I was going to say, if knight c6, I probably would have played queen d2 and then tried to get a rook to d1. Against this, I very much want to play a4. Unless I think I can play e5, if I can sneak e5 in. Like, maybe I should go h3. Idea of bishop takes f3, and then a b5, e5 is strong. It's actually like a pretty thematic option. Just not being afraid of what happens in the center or on the queen side. The thing about h3 is a lot of times I feel like black will voluntarily play bishop takes f3 without us having to ask the question. Let's just play a4. I'm okay with this move. It gains space, so even if he, was not intending to play b5 all along by playing c6, I think a4 is still a useful move, just to grab space on the queen side. So no harm, no foul. If I were him, I would just play knight bd7. But then again, knight bd7 might be met by e5. It's possible I will play that if this knight can't come to d7. So he may want to capture on f3 first and then play knight bd7 to discourage me from playing e5. Although, if knight bd7 directly and I play e5, he maybe can take on f3 at that point. I take f6, he takes e2, hitting my queen. Yeah, he can do that. h6. That's just kind of a bizarre move. That hints that he's maybe worried about something coming to g5, but that's not my intention. Probably queen d2 just to gain a tempo is good here. And then I can continue with h3 as planned. Yeah, let's gain the tempo first. He'll play king h7, almost certainly. And now h3 or rook ad1. h3 or rook ad1. Let's go rook ad1. I'm going to keep the tension a little bit longer with the bishop on the knight. I'm just curious how he'll react to this move. I very possibly could have used the f rook as well. That might have been slightly better, actually. I'm not sure. It's always a big question in this line. One advantage of rook ad1 is it allows me to play queen c1 later if I need to without disrupting my rook coordination. But given that I played a4, I'm kind of thinking I maybe should have played the other rook over. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, because now like if he goes knight bd7, I can't play a5. It's a little annoying. I think my position is still slightly better, but maybe I played a little inaccurately with the rook choice. I would like to play e5 right now, but he takes, I take, and he can take with the knight safely. So that's not going to fly. Maybe I can play queen c1 now. Yeah, let's do that. And it kind of renews the threat of e5. I think he'll probably play queen a5 or queen c7. I might be able to reintroduce my queen somewhere on the queen side too. Like maybe queen a1 and play for a5. It's nice to have the bishop pair in this position, but it probably won't be felt for quite a while. The strength of the bishop pair. Position's too closed at the moment. There hasn't been any pawn exchanges. I think queen c7 is safe enough. And then maybe he can look to stab at the center with e5 sometime soon. Queen c7, I might back this light square bishop off and play for f4. It's probably a decent plan. So bishop e2, if he goes knight b6, I can just play, if I want to, queen a1, I think. It's useful to cover the c4 square with this bishop. He maybe could go knight b6, queen a1, queen b4 in an effort to force the knight to c4. But I think I could play b3 then if I really wanted to, because my queen on a1 would be defending the knight on c3, so he wouldn't be able to bring it in. You can play e5 right now. If e5, I'll probably take. You'd have to take with a pawn. If not e5, I might go for f4 if I get a free move. Still, I think my opening play was less than stellar. Left something to be desired. I do have a time advantage now, though. 2.5 minutes or so. So candidate moves for him would be like e5, knight b6, as I was saying. Rook moves like rook f d8 or rook a d8, maybe rook a c8 even. I think e5 makes a good deal of sense. At some point, he wants to strike back at my center. And he can't play for b5 anymore, unless he wants to play a6 and go for b5 then. So e5 is probably the way he's going to go about doing it if he does it. He may not want to give me the d file, though. Could be his hesitancy. And as I said, if I get a chance, f4 is enticing. Then I'll have options of e5 or f5. They'll both be on the table. The bishop just didn't stand well on f3. It was doing nothing. It was blocked by the e-pawn. The only way my bishop would have been strong on f3 is if I could enforce e5, which wasn't going to happen after he moved his queen to a5. It's very possible I should have played bishop e2 before playing queen c1. So he does play this move. Now, do I want to play the capture on e5, or do I want to play f4, or even d5? d5 I don't like so much because he can close it up if he wants with c5. That's not conducive to my bishop pair. Taking is my first instinct, just to grab an open file. But f4 has some merit too, now that I look at it. It's not a completely ridiculous move either. If I take on e5 and he takes with the pawn, this knight is bound for c5, where it will attack e4. That troubles me somewhat. I could always play f3, I guess, but am I really going to accomplish much down the file? I don't know. I'm kind of thinking I want to play f4 now. f4, if he takes, I take with the bishop. That looks pretty good, actually. Let's do that. Gives him more to think about, too. If I had captured on e5, it's an easy decision. He has to take with the pawn. I mean, taking with the queen is bad. Taking with the knight would lose the d6 pawn. This makes him think about the tension more and gives him further options. I bet he takes on d4, but he may also decide to reinforce e5. Like maybe he'll play, for instance, rook a e8. Because one option I'm considering if I get another move is to play d takes e5, d takes e5, and then f5, pushing past. Trying to weaken his king side. Yeah, the more his clock ticks down, the tougher and tougher decisions I want to present him with. Less forcing moves if I can avoid it. More difficult decisions and time pressure. So I expect him to go attack my e4 pawn somehow now. Like maybe rook fe8. And I was thinking about where to put this bishop. It could come back to f3 now, but I also kind of like it going to d3 to x-ray his king. The only thing about going to d3 is that it loses touch with my rook on d1, so my rook will no longer be protecting that bishop. So I'm leaning a little bit towards f3. I don't think c5 is desirable for him. Maybe in some circumstances, but not here. Yeah, I think I'll definitely go to f3 with the bishop, because let's say he plays rook fe8, and I were to play bishop d3. Queen b4 is annoying. And same thing on this move. I think I should probably play bishop f3. His d6 pawn is undefended. I mean, I've thought for a second about taking and then grabbing on d6, but that's way too loose. He might have queen c5 check after that, or even just taking on c3, but queen c5 would just win a rook if if nothing else changes. So fork on my king and my rook. So let's go with this as planned. And if necessary, rook fe1. He's speeding up a little bit. So he's threatening to win the e-pawn. If I go rook fe1, can he capture? Don't think so. Capture on e4, that is. He's also threatening my a-pawn. I don't know, though. If take, I can always go queen a1 and make things difficult for him. e5 is very possible here, too. e5, pawn takes, knight d7. Tough to say who that favors. Probably him. I think I'll just play rook fe1. Throw the move back at him. If I have to give up the a-pawn, it's not a disaster. And I see a line. I mean, if knight takes a4, I could play knight takes, queen takes. I guess bishop takes f6, rook takes d6 if I really needed to. I probably wouldn't do that, though. That leads to an opposite color bishop position. But I wouldn't have to worry about my rook being lost because his queen can't get to c5. Great deal of tension in the position. If I get a moment, maybe I'll play the bishop back to f2 to attack d6. I can try that. I would prefer to keep my dark square bishop, unless I were to exchange for his dark square bishop. Like if he plays, knight fd7, I would for sure take on g7. And I'd probably win the d6 pawn, but... Okay, so here, I think this might be a weak move. I have e5 for one thing. I also have taking on c5 and then e5, which I just said I wouldn't want to give up the dark square bishop, but if I can establish two pawns on dark squares and block out his bishop, that might be worth it. Okay, so let's decide which move order is best. The e5 right away, he can't take because the bishop takes c5. So e5, let's say knight fd7. If I take on d6, he can take on e1 then. Rook takes e1, deflecting my rook, and he wins d4. So that's not so good. E5, knight fd7, are there any other moves? Maybe b4, something weird with b4, but I don't trust it. Somehow taking on c5 just seems correct now. Like, take on c5, he takes with the d-pawn. e5, knight d7, knight e4 is a pretty normal-looking continuation for this position. And try to get my knight into d6. Let's do that. I like the look of this line. These pawns are strong in the center now, and my light square bishop is opened up. His bishop's restricted. After knight d7, knight e4, he might undermine with f6, but I do get into d6 if I want. I suspect that's good. I could play bishop e4 if I wanted to pin him, but I really would prefer my knight on this square rather than the bishop. Another move that comes to mind is queen d2. But this, like, my chess senses are screaming to play this move, so if he wants to play f6, he can go ahead and do that. Actually, after f6, e6 is interesting too. So if rook takes e6, knight g5 check would pick up his rook on e6, discovery. I'm hoping he panics and like sacrifices on e5 because he might not want to deal with the threats here. Okay, here I can take on c5, right? Defends the pawn on a4 too. Yeah, let's bag this pawn. If queen e7, I can play b4 and prop up my knight. a5 might come, and if his knight is forced away from guarding the d5 square, my rook can infiltrate. Against this move, I could take, rook takes. Knight's not too stable here, though. I might just want to play king h1. Yeah, king h1 is useful prophylaxis. So now with queen b6, I have knight d7. So I'm on my way to consolidating this pawn. Yeah, this move is useful in every variation. I don't have a dark square bishop anymore, so tuck the king away, don't run into problems on the a7 g1 diagonal. Okay, this seems pretty desperate, but then again, he's really low on time, so take. He's going to take on e5. I can play g3 if I want. Let's do that. Just hold everything. Thought briefly about taking on g5, but he wins e5. I think it's better to hold the e5 pawn for a moment. If he ever plays that f6 move, I might play c4 and just kick his knight away, and rook d7 is looking really strong. Like, let's say the game goes g takes f4, g takes f4, f6. I'm thinking c4, and if knight b6, I have a5. So let's say c4, knight b4, and rook d7, I think would be just really, really good. He wants my knight out of there. He might be trying to come to h4 with the queen after a trade. I think that's what he's getting at. I can play knight d3. It's a concession to have to retreat that knight, but pawn's a pawn. Yeah, let's do knight d3. And if he takes, I'll take. Can even take on d5 first. Now let's do this first, though. Be flexible. The threats against my king are really vague. There's nothing really going on. c4 definitely comes to mind. I think my light square bishop could be strong, so c4, kick his knight away. Could go knight e7, though. Maybe he'll reposition it. Nevertheless, if he goes knight e7, I always have bishop e4 check if needed. Let's just bring our queen closer. Knight f5, I have bishop e4. I think I can just grab on a7 now if I want. Yeah, let's go get this pawn. If knight f5, maybe queen back to f2, just to stop knight g3 business. My queen trade is basically equivalent to winning for me. It does trade. I think knight up is good. If knight d4, I can just back my bishop off and get this knight into d6. Be really quite good. Just defend the a4 pawn. Give a check. And then I'll go here. Because bishop e4 is a huge problem. Here I can give a check. Or do I want to do that? This is totally winning, but I want to play it in the most accurate way. Okay, let's do this.
Check.
Okay, I thought he was going to play f6, but... Okay, so his position definitely fell apart in time pressure. Prior to that, he just said good game, so I'm just going to tell him thanks for the game. But prior to that, it was okay. Let's have a look. So this line, it's I think good enough for a small advantage for white. As I said, f4 is the theoretically critical move against the Pirc, the Austrian attack. And then after bishop g7, knight f3, there's quite a bit of theory. But white has an imposing pawn center, so lines that are critical in many openings are those that see one side occupying a large portion of the center, usually white. So this aspires to just a quieter position, bishop e2. A lot of people put the bishop on c4, but I kind of think it's misplaced in this line, because after castles, and then castles, knight takes e4 is something of a threat. And after knight takes, there's this d5 move, center fork trick. So the bishop back on e2 avoids that. So castle, castle, bishop g4, here, and then c6. I have seen this type of position played with knight c6 a lot too. It's debatable what white should do here. I mean, as I said, it's not like that bad of an idea to allow black to play for b5. Like, let's say I play rook e1 here, normal move. If he plays b5, I think e5 is pretty good. And then if de knight takes, and he'll have trouble on c6, even after a trade of the light square bishops. It's just not a situation he wants where this knight can't be developed because he loses that pawn. So a4, yeah, just not sure if I need that. That might be a small inaccuracy. I think I made a couple small inaccuracies, like a4 and maybe the rook a d1 move coming up. h6 I don't like for him. As I said, I don't really see the point of this move. It just seems like the pawn needs defending soon, and this king is a little more exposed. King side's a bit weaker. He loses a tempo. I wouldn't play that. Yeah, and here, I'm kind of thinking this might be a better move. Or maybe a5. Maybe I should just stake out more queenside space while I'm allowed. Because sometimes, after I played rook a d1, sometimes they might play a5 and even develop the knight through a6 and then in a bid to get to b4 with the knight. All in all, I think it would have been useful to have this rook still in the a file, so not sure about rook a d1. I'm going to add the engine now, just to see. Definitely likes my position. This is a pretty inflated evaluation, I think, but I think the engine is reflecting white's center and the possibility of just getting the bishop pair. So it says just go after the bishop pair right away. Don't be shy. So rook a d1. Yeah, and he took. That's why I tried to hold off on f3. I had a feeling he might want to take there at some point. So I sort of feel like I've saved a tempo. Although h3 is not necessarily a useless move. It could serve a great purpose, especially in getting my king to safety later. Just a luft move. Queen c1, okay. Maybe this move's all right. Computer says take more space. B4. Be greedy. Yeah, it looks okay to do that. If A5 undermining, I'm sure B5 is plenty strong for white. So my gradual plan is to open the position at the right time. I have the bishop pair plus a space advantage. I want to enforce a pawn break down the line. Like a pawn break on the E5 square would be a good example. He beat me to the punch and played E5 himself in a few more moves, but if I could do that, I would. And maybe to that end, I should play bishop E2 and try to go for F4 straight away. And in a dream world, play E5 immediately thereafter. It's not a bad move. Queen C1, this also is a move I'm not completely happy about in retrospect. I mean, you can see like none of these like things that I consider to be inaccuracies really change the evaluation much. But in my head, looking back on them, they just seem disjointed. Like Queen C1 was played mainly to threaten E5, but pretty clearly he's not going to allow that. So now bishop E2, I do like that move. He played E5. Yep, I went for F4. And with the time situation, like I said, if I take here, he's only got one good move. It's D takes. So I don't want to give him easy decisions when he's getting lower than me on time. It's starting to creep closer to 5 minutes for him, so an F4 just looks like a better move anyways. The engine says take on F4 as opposed to D4. I didn't really think about that too seriously for him. I just kind of assumed he'd rather take on D4 and knock out one of my center pawns. It actually says I should take with a rook. Interesting. A less natural move, but the idea is to pressure D6 quicker. How does this line go? Knight takes E4, rook takes E4, D5. Wow. Attacking the rook, and if the rook moves away here, then is D4? I guess he's got to defend the knight first. Queen D8. Take, take. White has two minor pieces for the rook and pawn. Some advantage. Bishop F2, avoiding D4. Yeah, I can't say I really thought about rook takes D4. I just instinctively took with my bishop. Maybe I should have thought about that. Yeah, and I like bishop F3 more than bishop D3 because I want this bishop defended. I don't want it to stop communicating with my rook. Looks like I made the right call in that sense. So bishop F3, he plays knight C5. I just played rook Fe1. I wonder what happens if he takes here. Queen A1. Am I going to just have B3? Maybe B3 right here? Exploiting the pin. That Queen A1 resource is annoying for him to deal with. That is one perk I have with Queen C1. So, knight takes A4, Queen A1, B5. What is this B4 move about? Oh, okay. That's very clever. So if he takes it, I take here, and then suddenly I have a battery on the long diagonal. Like even if queen takes, I can just take here. Yeah, and I'm winning a piece. If queen takes A1, I come all the way back. Bishop takes A1. Up a full piece. That's very clever. So he dropped the queen back. And here, took on C5. Yeah, I like this decision. E5, knight FD7 I was less sure about. Okay, and now it says bishop takes C5. This could even transpose after this. Yeah, so I think bishop takes C5 is the tidiest way to play this. I have to be careful about where and when I want to exchange this dark square bishop, because I don't want to just exchange it for one of his knights if this bishop will have good scope after the exchange. So I'd rather trade it at a time where I know that if he has this bishop remaining, it'll be out of the game. And this E5 opportunity was a nice one to implement that plan. Because now he's going to have a hard time breaking this pawn down. Was a little bit worried about F6, but I just kind of trusted that I would have good resources against this. Like knight D6 is one move that comes to mind. I think I mentioned E6 too, so that if rook takes, I have knight G5 check, picking up the rook. So that was good. So I think knight E4 is a good move. Yeah, and here he lost the C5 pawn, but it's a very tough position. Black's coordination is poor, his pieces are a little misplaced. There's a lot of ways White can play this. What if he plays a move like this? just getting out of the way of knight d6 with tempo. So I should go queen e3. Okay, let's just say like b6 or something. Knight d6, yeah. It's more suffering. Even if there's no immediate tactic or anything for white, which there probably isn't, it's just hard for him to break out of this. He has a weakness on f7. I have much more space. If I want to probe him further, I could probably play like h4, h5. Bishop e4, maybe to x-ray his king. It's not a position black can hold. So knight b6, I take on c5. Here. I like this king h1 move. I would play that again. I like that better than taking on d5. Admittedly, this might just win a second pawn, though. I didn't want to create more of an imbalance, though, in this time pressure. I wanted to just keep it tidy. And I felt like I could take this knight whenever I wanted, so... And king h1, useful move in all lines, because we don't want queen b6 to suddenly appear and pin us. Here, g3. This might be a little timid, but I didn't really want to speculate with stuff like this. Though I do see that's probably good, too. If he takes the queen, I have knight d7, at the very least. Forking the queen and the rook. But it's messier, like he could take with the bishop, and yeah, the computer says plus 4.5, but if I look at this position in time pressure, it doesn't look like a plus 4.5 position to me. It looks like a better position for white, but a messy one. Whereas g3, I just keep the status quo and keep my structure nice and tidy. Here, knight back to d3. Again, might be a little passive, but it holds f4 securely. Then I backed his knight off. Knight e7. Yep, queen e3. Queen makes an appearance. Attacks a7. Here. So that's a clear indication that he wants to get to the knight to f5, but he doesn't want to allow bishop e4 pinning. Yeah, and queen f2, fine move, I think. Once again, just played for safety reasons. Don't want knight g3 to be played. And I'm offering a queen trade, which is very advantageous at this point. He took, that surprised me a little bit. I thought he'd like persist with something like this, but it doesn't change the evaluation. Now we're up 2 pawns. I think the only thing white would want to be concerned about here is a transition into an opposite colored bishop endgame that, you know, in all likelihood would probably still be lost for black, but that would complicate things. That's realistically black's only saving grace, is if he could trade these knights. But even that transition I would do under the right circumstances, like if rooks were still on board, or if I knew that one of my passed pawns could have a breakthrough on the queen side, for instance.
Check.
Here I gave a check. Yep. Knight c5, attacking his rook, so gaining a tempo. Bishop e4. And here I gave a check, and I thought he was going to play f6, and I had... excuse me. I thought I had e takes f6 in this position, intending bishop takes, and then take here.
Check.
King takes, and then
Check.
here, and go win the rook. But actually, he might have knight, bishop f8. Somehow still winning for white, but maybe I might have paused and thought about it a little bit more after f6. This move does look pretty crushing. Yeah, if rook takes b3, do I just take on f6? Yeah. And then his bishop doesn't have the f8 square. He's got some... Actually, he doesn't even have checks because the bishop controls b1. Yeah, so this would be crushing. If, like, bishop h8, I'm sure knight e5 is
Check.
immediately game over. So, many roads lead to Rome.
Check.
Okay, well, I hope you guys enjoyed that one. Thanks for playing, George. And I will be back tomorrow with another standard game. Talk to you guys later. Bye.